There was a time when Mr. Carter said, and this too may be prophetic, that the presidency is getting too big for one man to handle. And I remember Mike Wallace on my show saying that within our lifetime, in the very near future, he thought there would no longer be a presidency in the foreseeable future. How do you feel about that?
Well, I agree both that it's a terrible job.
Oh, it's a thankless job.
Yeah, and it does seem too big for any one person, but I don't have a better way of doing it. You know, ultimately the leadership of the country has to come from the White House, and I don't see any way to divide that power up. It ultimately has to be entrusted in one person, and the job just gets more and more difficult as the problems that face our country and the world get so much more complex.
What's the toughest problem facing Mr. Reagan today? Where do you start?
Domestically, the economy. And again, I don't want to be overly partisan, because I can tell you this: the darker side of me kind of wants to say I told you so. But I live in this country too, and I want. We only have one president, so I would like for him to succeed. Now, with that caveat, I will proceed to dump on President Reagan.
Whoa.
President Reagan, then Governor Reagan, said in the 1980 campaign that he had the cure to the nation's economic ills. He was elected largely on that theme of Reaganomics. To his credit, he got his economic policies through the Congress. And 2 years later, there's abundance of evidence that it's not working. The difficulty now is for him to change in mid-course after he has been committed so long philosophically to this
What would that change in mid-course be if you were there advising him?
Well, what he's got to do, he's got to do something about these horrible budget deficits. Next year, President Reagan will preside over a budget deficit larger than all the budget deficits of all the presidents in our history. And until we deal with those deficits, I really don't see how our economy can recover very strongly.
How do we deal with them?
Well, we're in the soup now because of this large tax cut that was passed last year. We've had to offset that by tax increases this year. I think we're in for some rough times, but we're in for some rough times regardless of who our president is. If President Carter had been reelected, things would not be rosy now. We face in this country 10 or 15 very tough years in the future, and yet we find the American people very fickle. They want immediate and painless answers to our country's problems, and we're going to have to tough out these next 15 or 20 years. It's going to be rough.
Are you still in close contact with Mr. Carter? Because I know that living presidents are asked for advice, and they're called in, aren't they, periodically for...
Occasionally. President Reagan has not called on President Carter to the extent that President Carter called on President Ford and Nixon. You know, it's a big dilemma.
But aren't they briefed? Aren't presidents briefed periodically, the living presidents?
Occasionally.
Past presidents?
President Carter has not been briefed very much by the Reagan administration. It's a real dilemma for our country. You only have a handful of people that sit in that Oval Office, and all of our presidents, Nixon, Ford, Carter, they represent an enormous resource and an enormous amount of knowledge. So it's to President Reagan's interest, for example,
indeed,
to call on President Nixon, to call on President Ford, to call on President Carter.
Mr. Jordan, I know you've been asked this so often you probably have pat answers, but the press did label you as a playboy. You know, it said things like...
That was one of the nicer things they said
Mr.
about
Jordan
me.
and his friends were at Studio 54 and taking cocaine, etc., etc. Would you comment on those statements?
Well,
Was any of it true?
Well,
God, I hope you were having some fun.
Not nearly as much fun as it was reported. Now, there's an enormous curiosity about people around the president. That was particularly true in the case of President Carter, because he was an outsider and he was not a product of the Washington political establishment. I went to Washington, and the Washington press corps grossly exaggerated my authority in the administration. Said I was the second most powerful man in the country, which was not true.
Who was?
Walter Mondale. I went in the space.
I mean,
oh, sure. No, I'm not kidding you.
The vice president?
Yes, he was involved.
I know it's a title, but I mean...
No, Walter Mondale was involved in every meeting, saw every piece of paper.
You were not involved in every meeting?
No. I didn't have access to all the materials that Mondale.
He's sure
saw, for
very
example.
visible now. Do you think in '84 he might be?
I'm sure that he might run for
Take a
president.
shot?
Let me get back to the original
Okay.
question you asked me.
Yeah, I'm going to let you go.
Even though it's your show.
I'm going to keep the place.
All right. Hold on to the chair.
Yes.
Right? So at any rate, in the space of 8 or 10 months, the gossip columnists started in on me, and I went from being this person described as the second most powerful man in the country to being an object really of ridicule. I had all these things said about me. None of them were true.
You never went to Studio 54?
No, I
You never snorted cocaine?
I've never used drugs in my life.
Good.
But to prove that, I had to go through a year of investigation and enormous legal fees. But that's just part of being in public life these days.
What will Hamilton Jordan be doing in 1984?
I'm not even sure what I'm going to be doing in 1983. I don't know. I just finished my book, and I've been teaching at Emory University.
What are you teaching?
Political science, probably.
Well, I don't have a teaching load per se. I've been lecturing there in different areas, and after I get through promoting my book, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So if you hear of anything out there, let me know.
It's so difficult for me to believe that a man like you doesn't have plans after this book tour. I can't believe that.
No, I don't.
It's like us.
He's not in show business.
But it's
close.
the same. It comes down to being the same thing. You can be very hot and very employed and very talked about and
That's
very
right.
important, and tomorrow you're out of a job.
But with me, it was different. I mean,
Do you have a resume?
No, because I can't type.
So we used to have a lot of people around with my old producer who couldn't type.
I'll be glad to give my credentials on the air right here if you'll give me a couple
Oh, you don't
of
have
minutes.
to. We know all about you.
No, but unfortunately. No, but I made a decision in May of 1980 at a time when I thought President Carter was going to be reelected. I signed my contract to teach with Emory then, so even if had been reelected, I was going to leave government in 1980 because I had just had enough of that. I wanted to do something else.
So you continue with your teaching after the book tour?
Probably not. I may write another book. I really am unsure about the future.
This one's doing very well.
Yes, but I'm really unsure about the future. I don't know what I'm going to do. But
Well, why don't you come to Africa with me and write a book about the work that the Christian Children's Fund is doing?
I share two of your loves. I love children and I love animals.
Great.
I love animals.
Will you please stay for the rest of the show?
Yeah, I've got to catch a plane in a little while, but
All right, you let me know.
as long as I can.
Fine. We'll be right back with Sandy Kenyon and the entertainment news right after this.